Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Rana Ottallah. I am a parent of a daughter with hearing loss. I've been a special education advocate for about 12 years, and I would like to share some of my knowledge with you guys. Um, what I would like to say that I'm not an attorney. This is not a legal advice. This is just my knowledge over the years of the laws and regulations, and I would like to share it with you guys. My understanding is that there are a lot of questions about students attending school during COVID, and I would like to see what questions you might have, um, because I have a long presentation, but it's important to answer your current questions, especially if the majority of you guys are parents of younger children, and there is an immediate needs for some answers. So I would like to try to offer some answers before we try. We probably can give it like about 10 minutes, and then we can dive into the presentation. So if Sister Filial can read the questions. Okay, what to expect with an IEP? A regular everyday IEP, a transition IEP, out of high school into school during COVID. These are two. This is like a broad question. So I would like more specific, if you guys don't mind. What to expect during COVID? Okay, what to expect about the IEP during COVID? You expect that every service that your child received before COVID, that he should be able to receive after COVID. Nothing should change other than maybe the delivery modality of receiving the service. I think that's the only thing that we have to get used to, um, receiving services in a different modality. We're not going to be doing one-to-one, face-to-face, but the services have to be provided. So let me give you an example. If a student needed an ASL interpreter in the classroom and now they're doing virtual, then the virtual should include an ASL interpreter. If a student had an ABA therapist working with him in the classroom, most of the time this ABA therapist is private and she was there to support the student functioning in the classroom. The ABA therapist can be utilized to work with the child from home to give him the access that he needs to education virtually. So don't give up any service just because of COVID, because the State Department of Education did not give any waiver for any services for students with disabilities. On the contrary, actually, there's a lot of things you need to expect. Let me give you an example. The students, the school closed in March. So if your child had speech therapy twice a week and he missed 2 weeks in March, that's four. 4 weeks in April, that's two, four, 4 and 4, 8. So that's 12 sessions. And let's say two more, 12 and 8, 20. Let's say your child missed 20 sessions of speech therapy because of school closure. Your child is entitled to what's called compensatory services. So the IEP team will meet at the beginning of the school year. You need to discuss all the services that your child missed, and you need to make sure that these services are provided. How would they provide this missed session? So instead of your child getting speech twice a week, your child will get speech 3 times a week. And sometimes they can offer services before school, after school, and during breaks, holidays and breaks. But your child is entitled to 20 sessions of speech therapy that he missed because of the school closure, and he should not be the one paying for it. Let me see. So this is an example of what to expect. Another thing is you need to expect is especially for students who attend virtually, there needs to be an explanation of what does virtual look like and what kind of access your child is going to need. So let's say we have a student who is blind. They give him a computer. The computer has to have a screen reader for the student to be able to listen to the lesson and have access to it. If the student is blind and he needs access to braille books still needs to be provided. So do not give up on access. It might be a little bit hard to fight because they're trying to figure it out too. Schools are trying to figure it out. Teachers are trying to figure it out. State is trying to figure it out. But we know that it can be done. I would say, and I told this to a parent one time when he called me, standardized testing were supposed to be done on the computer. So every and any possible accommodation that you can think of, they embedded it on computer testing. So if that can be done for computer testing, it can be done for classroom instruction. So it's there. There is no need for us to reinvent the wheel. Accommodation for online testings are available. We just need to find them, and I can send a link to that to share with you guys and look at what applies for your child and you ask for it. How to prevent regression during virtual learning. I think we have to come into the school thinking that there is regression already. And that's why every school district will do testing for the kids, for the students, to see how much regression took place and what do they need to make up for the regression. But as a parent, I would tell you, who are you measuring regression against? Every student in the nation missed school. Every special education student, every gifted student, every regular ed student missed school. Everybody regressed. So there is no really much to compare to. The value of our children's life is more important. We need to focus on that and then fill in the gaps with everything else that's needed. But again, um, you might feel that even your child, you might think even if my child regressed academically, he might have grown socially by being home with you guys, by interacting with the family, by eating with the family, by having story time with the family. So it's relevant. It's no, it's not relevant. It's it depends on what you measure regression compared to, whether it's education, whether it's social, whether it's emotional. They might have some growth in certain areas. It's not necessarily education, but that growth will give them more maturity. When they go back to school, they can do more. But I also heard some families work together to try to get additional support. So if you know, let's say two other families that their students are getting virtual help and they worried virtual education and they worried about having the right support, you can get together. You can hire somebody to work with all your kids at the same time at one location, and you create your own pod where you know that those kids are not exposed. Limit interaction of who comes in and who goes out. Choose somebody's house if the mom's at home, stay at home mom, and then that could be the extra support, and you can split up the fee of that teacher. But we have to think outside the box because these are not normal times. We can expect to get our speech and OT minutes remotely. Okay, speech should be provided remotely because my own child got it um, in April and March remotely. OT, I think it needs to be some kind of partnership because the occupational therapist will give you strategies and you as a parent, you need to come and implement it. But she will be able to guide you. How to get states mandate insurance for ABA. I'm going to tell you what, state to mandate insurance. In Louisiana, ABA is, we passed a bill that specifically about ABA services. Um, Students with autism, with Down syndrome, and other disability qualify for it. And actually, we got to the point that ABA therapists can come into the schools and spend the whole day working with the student. You might reach out to your human service authorities and see if they can help with that. And they might have some service providers that can help with that. But if it's a state level thingy, it might be need like a state level parent advocacy need to be utilized to push for a state legislation. Try to open. Any more questions? Okay, jobs for adults with disabilities. Okay. Um, we're going to talk about jobs when we talk about the transition planning. Um, but right now with COVID, a lot of adults are home. So what I would suggest is that if you find out that your child or your adult child has a hobby, a skill, you might want to work on it, try to help develop it. And by the time things get settled down, that would be the job training that your child needed. So let's say if your child needed to work at a store, so maybe you want to have your child help organize the pantry. Maybe you need to teach your child basic addition and subtraction so that when he's assigned a cash register, he can do the work. If your child has interest in arts or crafts, maybe you need to bring the supplies and help develop that skill so that when it's time to go into the job world, they have the skill already there, and they will not need much on the job training. Okay. I think we can dive into the presentation if there's no any more questions, and maybe at the end we can see if any more questions I can answer. Okay. So can we share the slide, please? Okay, the title of our slide, our presentation today is Transition Planning for Special Education Students. We need to know everything about transition. I think the majority of you probably already went through transition from early childhood to the regular school, where there was a need for assessment, there was need for a plan, there was need for services. So what we're trying to do right now when transition out of high school to the post-secondary life, whether it's college, whether it's vocation, whether it's job, there needs to be a plan. So together today, we're going to learn more about it. Okay. I included some quotes because I think it's important to understand that we have amazing kids and we don't have to be typical kids to be able to succeed. If you're always trying to be normal, you will never know how amazing you can be. Maya Angelou. So if you keep that in mind, we can appreciate our children more. In this presentation, I'm going to cover definition of the transition plan, what timelines we have, transition goals, and what transition services are, how to develop a transition plan, and I'm going to discuss a couple of real life scenarios that you might find helpful. Okay. Transition usually starts at 16, and by law starts at 16. So by the time the child graduates high school, we basically do not have much time to put something in place. That's why we need to keep in mind that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we need to start as soon as we can. What are transition services? Transition services are services and supports, services to support the student transition from high school to post-secondary life. We have to put some goals in line, and we have to think about independent living skills. I think it's hard for us to think about what happens if we as parents no longer available in our children's life. We think we're going to live forever, but we don't. So we have to make sure that we plan ahead and we plan for our kids that they can be as independent as possibly can, and put a plan in place to get them to the point that they can live independently or semi-independently with the support they need, so that when we're not around, they are taken care of. We have to look at what they want to do after high school. Do they want to attend college? Do they want to go to a vocational school? Do they want to trade? Do they want to get straight to employment? But we need to keep in mind that we need to understand that there's laws and regulations in place that allows for this process or this planning to take place. And every student who has an IEP during high school years must have a transition plan. And it must be based on the student's strengths and interests and preferences. Most of the time, we focus on what the student cannot do, but I think it's important to think about what the student can do and how can we build on his or her strengths to be able to get them to find a job or go to school or learn a trade that aligns with their interests and their strengths. Who should receive a transition plan? Every student in high school with an individual education plan needs to get transition services no later than 16. So some states start as early as 14, but it cannot be post the child's 16th birthday. The severity of the student's disability or the student's skill level does not matter. Whether the student has speech only IEP or the student has severe cognitive disabilities that's more than 3 standard deviation below the mean, anywhere in between, they need to get a transition plan. It's a requirement. Who should have a transition plan? All students with disabilities attending public schools, public charter schools, state schools, or private schools who accept students with service plans. So if the private schools if the private school student I'm sorry, if the private school student receives services from the local education agency or the local district, then they must have a transition plan. When should the transition plan start? It should start no later than the 16th birthday, but some states start as early as 14. And I would advise you as a parent to have the end goal in mind when you start drafting your child's first IEP. No matter what the severity of the disability is, you need to have a plan early. So if you think, like we have seen so many cases of high school students and the parent think they're going to college and the student cannot read. And then the parents get so disappointed because they had all their hopes up, but the student cannot read. But the parent missed 16, 18 years of the child's life, not knowing that the child cannot read and not setting goals for that child to be able to read. So we cannot start late. We have to start the planning with the first IEP. I would suggest that every parent would say, I expect my child to, like I would say for my own child, I expect my child to graduate a high school with a high school diploma and attend college and get a degree in the area of interest of hers. I started that same sentence when she was 5. And I keep saying it every time because everyone who works with my child needs to know that ultimately she needs to pass her ACT. She needs to pass her end of course. She needs to be able to get into college, and they need to plan accordingly. She cannot be skipped. She cannot be ignored. She cannot be not serviced. Whatever issues that she has, they need to work on it to the maximum extent of her abilities. So we have to keep the bar high, and we have to um, presume competence. At no point of time would we say, no, he can't do it. No, he will not do it. Always presume competence and make sure that the plan is, let me see what that word is. The plan for your child is not, should exceed his abilities so that you can challenge and you can put on effort. And everybody who works with him have to put effort so that you can challenge that child and get the best out of him. Because presuming competence, because we don't know what's going on with the children. We don't know what they, most of the time we don't know their abilities. We presume that they can do or they cannot do. But we have to keep the bar high. Who should participate in the transition planning? All IEP team members, including the student and the parent. And I think at 16, you cannot hold an IEP without a student. Here in Louisiana, they started to enforce that every student have to be part of it. And sometimes they push it too much because kid will have severe autism. He will have meltdown when he sees a parent. He does not want to sit still. They pushing it too much. But I think the majority of the students would be able to participate in their transition planning from 16 or older or 14 or older. Representatives from other agency needed to be invited to participate, but need parent consent. So we have Louisiana Rehabilitation Services, and I'm sure that there is rehabilitation services in every state because this is federal law. So a representative from rehabilitation services for every state need to be present, especially if we're discussing post-secondary services. So let's say, and I know in the past, they paid for college tuition for kids, they paid for assistive technology for students, and there is money. If your state is able to draw down that federal funding, every student should benefit from it. Unfortunately, in Louisiana, we're not coming up with the match, so we're not getting the services. So they only service level 4, which is of the most needy student. But in states that are able to provide the match, so the match is the federal government will give you 80%, and the state has to come up with 20% to have 100%. So if the state is not able to come up with the match, they lose the money, and another state takes it. So I'm presuming that if you live in certain states that are able to draw down the federal money, then every student should have access to Louisiana rehabilitation services funding, and they should be present at the transition meeting, and their services have to be utilized. Anytime transition services are discussed at IEP meeting, parents must be notified because they cannot make decisions on behalf of your child when you're not present, because until the child is 18 years old, you still need the parent consent. What is a transition plan? It's a statement of transition services. The same way the IEP is a statement of services, the transition plan is a statement of transition services. It needs to be developed by the IEP team at the IEP meeting. It needs to list activities and goals for the student, and that he needs to reach before or after they get out of high school. The IEP team members' roles, there has to be a role for each IEP team member regarding the activities or the goals of transition. Timeline to start at the end of each activity. I'm sorry. Timeline and start and end of each activity. So when your child hits 16, you're going to start seeing an extra sheet included in the IEP document. And it talks about transition, and it talks about goals. It talks about what the student responsibility should be, what the parent responsibility should be, what the service provider's responsibility should be, and what the school role should be. And it should capture, in so many words, the interest of your child. If your child is interested in college, or your child is interested in art, or your child is interested in sports, or whatever your child interested in is, there should be an interview with your child before the transition meeting, because they need to have an idea what to include in the transition plan. What every transition plan must include. They must include a graduation plan. And most of the time, unfortunately, graduation plan is not included in the IEP document. The school counselor does not participate in the IEP. So they will have a plan completely different than the typical kids, and that's wrong, because your student needs to talk to the school counselor, the academic counselor, and they have to work together to make sure that he or she are receiving the right Carnegie units, attending the appropriate classes based on what the transition post-secondary should look like. Annual transition goals based on age-appropriate transition assessment. So same with when you first enter from early childhood into school services, there needs to be an assessment. We need to know what their capabilities are, what they can do, what they cannot do, what we need to work on. So if the student's reading level is 4th grade, we know that the majority of the policies and procedures that at any job have, your child needs to be able to read it, right? So if they're not reading at grade level or close to grade level, or able to read and comprehend the majority of the things that they need, their job duties, what to do in an emergency, where's the exit, what to do if something happened, they need to be able to read the policies and procedures if that is the career of choice. So we cannot wait until they exit high school and say they cannot read or they cannot sign, or they cannot count money, or they cannot go purchase basic things. So based on the capability of the students, we need to set goals. And if we know they're capable of doing it, we need to set the goals early enough so that by the time they exit high school, they have mastered these goals. We measure post-secondary goals based on transition assessment related to education, training, employment, independent living, and how to implement these services. And we have to collaborate with other agencies. So you do not set a goal about independent living. No, you cannot complete a transition plan if you don't have an idea about independent living. Where would the student be living after high school? Would they be living at home with family? Would they have a guardian? Would they live in a group home? Would they live on campus? Would they live off campus? All these scenarios have to be discussed so that we can prepare the student to living independently. What kind of training does that student need? If the student is going to work, let me see, if the student is going to work at a factory, what does he need to know about that? If the student is going to be working at a bookshop, what do they need to do? If the student is going to be working at a pet store, what do they need to do? So depending on what career pathway they have in mind, we have to put in place training and maybe some internship so that they're used to it, with support, with supervision, so that when they exit high school, they have done this before and it's easy for them to continue doing it moving on. Let me see. Employment, training, related education. Okay. Okay, next page. Okay. Things to consider when creating transition plan. Academic interest. Some children like reading. Some children like math. Some children like science. Some they're not interested. Some like to work with their hands. Some would like to do physical stuff. So we need to be aware of that. What would interest the child? How to prepare the adult student by now to make decision on their own. Would that student be able to receive his social security check? Would that student be able to write a check? Would that student understand what does it mean when he writes a check to somebody? How to use money, how to use a credit card, how to make transfers, depending on the child's ability. What would the family do if the child is not able to take care of his finances? So these self-determination things have to be discussed with everybody as a family, and it needs to be discussed before the student turn 18, because there's some legal issues that have to be done. And once the student turns 18, it's going to be hard to do it without a lot of legal fees. We talked again about independent living. We need to know, where would the student live and how much support does he need? Is that student able to do basic hygiene things, brushing their teeth, getting dressed, putting shoes on, taking a bath? All these things are important. I'm not saying the school would do, but they would work on brushing teeth. They would work for young ladies how to change pads. They would work on how to button buttons. Like, all these things would help towards independent living for students who need it. And they have to be considered when we create a plan. Next slide. Formal and informal assessment. So we need to know what the student needs, and we need to know what to set as goals. And these goals have to be based on the assessment. And the assessment include standardized testing, because now everybody takes them, whether they're gifted, whether they're regular class, or whether they are taking the modified class. Everybody has to take it. Um, and based on the scores, we figure out how much support is needed. So in Louisiana, they used to give alternative tests, and they had this alternative curriculum. And if the student stayed in high school for 4 years or 6 years, they have the same curriculum over and over. Even after the student finished that curriculum, finished that book, they still give it to him as long as he attends school. Then parents felt like that's not right. We're not keeping the kids there just to sit there. We need them to grow. So they created a curriculum that would grow with the student, whether they stay there for 4 years at high school or they stay there for 6 or more. They would learn something new every time they go to school. Because without trying to teach the kids, you're not going to know if they're able to learn the skill or the facts or not. Include interest tests and work samples. I need to be able to know if this student is interested in crafts and she wants to make jewelry. Show me some of her work. And based on the work that she's doing, I can help get materials, I can get customers, I can do some internship, I can work with different stores to take her products if she makes it. I need to see work samples. Informal assessments, student observation by school educators. The student spends about 9 hours a day with the teachers. So based on the teacher observation, that will give us a clue about what their interests are. Student interviews, like what do you want to do when graduate? What do you have in mind? It's important to get their input because we cannot create a plan without the student input because it's going to be about his life or her life, and they need to have something to say about it. Parent interview. It's important because sometimes um, students are able to do more than they show at school. They can load the dishwasher, they can do laundry, they can sort stuff, they can tidy up, they can do stuff that would help with independent living. But teacher at school might not be aware of that, so it's important to include the parent with the interviews. And again, school performance and academic data. How well are they performing at school? Are they able to earn Carnegie units? Are they able to take standardized testing? Do they need a modified test? um, all this is taken into account. When do transition services end? When the student no longer qualifies for special education. So sometimes they do evaluation and then the student is doing so good that he or she doesn't need services anymore. So the minute those services end, then the student does not qualify for transition services. Or when the student graduates high school, he's done, got their diploma, then we cannot go back and say we want transition services. It should be done before graduation. Or when the student ages out at age 22. So if a transition plan is not done, is not completed, goals are not met by 22, it cannot continue after 22. That's it. That's a timeline for IDA services. Next, please. How can parents and guardians be active participant in the student's transition plan? Parents need to know all your education laws and rights. You need to know what your child is entitled to. You need to know what you as a parent is entitled to. And you need to be able to go to that meeting knowing your rights so that nobody can cheat your child out of a service or cheat your child out of support or cheat your child out of an opportunity. I always say knowledge is power, and it starts with you as a parent. And as we move forward, this knowledge and this power moves up to the student when he becomes self-advocate. So this is the most important, that you have to know education laws and rights. Don't be shy to ask questions, because if you don't ask, you'll never know. And maybe your question will open up a discussion about what's needed that nobody ever thought about before. And nobody knows your child more than you. So you have to ask questions and you have to be able to advocate for your child's needs. Understand your child's strength and weakness. Again, we always fall into the trap of focusing on what our children cannot do, and we never look at what they can do. So I think it's important after this session that each parent of you guys go home and write what your child can do, because we can build on the strength and we can support the weakness. But if all we look at is the weakness of our children, we'll never be able to support them the way they need to be supported. Know what your child needs and what he or she wants to do now or in the future. I think it's important to have an idea what they want to do, because you don't want to go to the meeting not knowing anything and you'd be surprised, especially if the biggest goal is something that's hard to achieve. Not to put them down, but we need to be able to talk to them about it. If you want to do 1, 2, 3, did you do ABC to prepare you for it? So it cannot just happen all of a sudden when the graduation happens. No, you cannot go this pathway because you did not do what you needed to do. So it's important for you as a parent to catch up on that, to have a discussion, so that when you go to the meeting, you can advocate for them to have the support that they needed. Like, my child is deaf, she's oral, she doesn't know sign language, but I think it's important for her when she gets to that point that she gets somebody to teach her sign language, because that's a skill will help her incorporate with the deaf community. and have their friends who sign. And a formal training on sign language or formal education in sign language would benefit her, especially if she wants to explore the idea of being an interpreter, which she's not, but that's an option. So we need to know what they want and what their interests are. Uh, what is your child's skills and ability? Again, if your child is interested in mechanic work and they're able to change a tire, they're able to change the water in the car, they're able to do basic things with mechanic, that could be an interest that they can explore. He can be a mechanic assistant, he can be a mechanic. So you need to know what the interest of your child is. What challenges your child might face? Again, if we are college bound, or we want to do something that needs a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of math skills, and this is a challenge. So what do we need to put in place so that we can overcome that challenge if possible? Again, to the maximum abilities of that student. So you do the work, you help your child do the work, you do the support, you have goals set, but at the end of the day, um, it's up to the maximum extent that's possible with your students' abilities, because we need to be realistic about what can happen and what cannot happen. We need to challenge them to do their best that they can do, but at the same time, we have to be aware of the limitations that come with certain disabilities. What are your child's academic, employment, independent living goals? You need to know that with a discussion with your child, and you need to plan ahead before you go to the meeting. Understand the gap between what your child wants and how she functions now. We just mentioned that. If it's not doable because the severity of the disability is so severe that he cannot accomplish that, we need to have a different plan. And there is always a way of doing things. So if somebody wants to be like a master chef, but cannot pass the certification test to be a master chef, they can always do something in the kitchen. They can do prep work, they can do purchase order, they can do different things that will help the master chef do his work well. So it's not that it's out of the, it cannot be done, but maybe it can be done in a way that meets that student's level. Okay, next please. What is the student's role in creating his or her transition plan? Student must learn more about his and her own disability. It's important to talk about it. We cannot ignore it. It cannot be the taboo. It cannot be the elephant in the room that nobody talks about. They need to just understand their disabilities so that they can understand what accommodation to ask for when it get to the point that they are attending college, attending community, a school, or getting a job. They don't understand their disability, they will not be able to effectively advocate for themselves. So we need to have that talk. Students must think about long-term goals for her life and education. It cannot be short-term. It cannot be, I want to just graduate high school and wait and see. Um, I think it's important to have a long-term goal, a short-term goal, and you work towards the ultimate goal. And that will help the student be more focused about what he needs to do with his life. A student must learn self-advocacy by learning how to discuss strengths, interests, and needs, learn about education and employment accommodations and how to ask for them, learn about laws that protect individuals with disabilities in higher education, employment, and community living. I would suggest that in every IEP that your child have, from the time that child is 6 until they graduate high school, that you need to have a self-advocacy goal. The same way you have a goal for math, a goal for English, a goal for speech, a goal for behavior, you need to have a self-advocacy goal so that your child grows up knowing how to stand up for himself, knowing what his rights are, and maybe attend trainings, participate, especially like within the disability group that he or she might belong to. They need to learn that, and you need to start early. What to look for in post-secondary programs. So if we plan, let's say we plan to attend a university or we plan to attend a job, we need to go explore this place that we want to plan ahead for. So We need to look at programs and extracurricular activities that are accessible. So I don't go and attend a university or a college or a work place that does not have a wheelchair access ramp, that does not have a sports team, that does not accommodate children with different needs. It has to be a place, whether it's schooling, higher education, or work, that embraces your child's and their abilities and post-secondary schools might provide mobility access, again, wheelchair ramps, aids and services necessary for full and effective communication access, whether it's for the blind, whether it's for deaf, whether it's hard of hearing, whether it's for nonverbal, whether it's for deaf blind. They have to be able to provide aids and services to provide effective full access, because that's required under American with Disabilities Act. Policies, practices, and procedures that are modified to meet the needs and abilities of the student. They cannot be rigid. They cannot be, oh, this is the way we do things. There has to be a way of doing things differently to accommodate the students. If you have a blind student and you don't have a menu that is in Braille, you need to create one. And the policies and procedures have to be flexible enough to be able to accommodate students. Accommodations are individuals and vary from student to student. So that's why the role of the student to self-advocate for what he or she needs, because they might have some access for student who's been there in the past, but those accommodations do not apply for your child. So they need to be able to ask for accommodation they need that works for them individually. Okay. Right, what should not be forgotten. This is advice that you need to take with you, whether you're attending your first IEP or whether you're writing your transition plan. You have to document, because if it's not written, it didn't happen. So be aware of that. Documentation. Okay, so the law prohibits any higher education institute from asking about if the applicant has a disability or not. So it's not there anywhere in the application. If you say it anywhere in any higher education institute application, you need to report it immediately, because they should not do that, because that could be basis for discrimination based on disability. But when the student is accepted into that university, that community college, or whatever it is, that program, they need to come up, that student needs to come up with documentation to show what disability he or she has and what's needed to accommodate their educational need or job training. So now it's on you to provide the documentation. It's on you to make sure that the student services, disability services, have a copy of 504 plan, or have a copy of your old IEP, so that they can, based on that, they can create a 504 plan for you. So you have to keep records of everything, and you have to be able to access these documents or these records when asked for, and when you needed to be able to ask for accommodations. Next, please. Grievance procedures in post-secondary settings. I'm thinking the majority of you right now, by now, know that you can always appeal an IEP decision. You can always file a complaint. You can always ask for due process. There is a way to do it throughout school years. There's also a way to do it post-secondary. So if your child is attending a community college and an issue came up regarding to your child's services that was not met. So the first step is student have to address it with the instructor directly. If the instructor is not wearing their FM system, if the instructor is not providing a hard copy, if the instructor is not working collaboratively with the interpreter, whatever is happening in the classroom that is not provided your child, your student, full access, it has to be addressed with the instructor first, because he cannot address something he's not aware of. So that's the first step. Second step, you discuss the situation with the school's disability resources and services office. So if the discussion with the instructor does not work, you need to go to the disability office and bring it to their attention so that they can do whatever is needed to fix that situation. You can also consult with the ADA 504 coordinator, because every college or university have one, because the majority either get funding from the state, the federal government, or they have to abide by ADA requirement, and they should not be discriminating based on disability. If things do not get resolved, you can always file a complaint with the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, and that's usually the ultimate thing. Especially when it comes to violation of equal access to education, whether it's for deaf, hard of hearing, deaf blind, or nonverbal student. Communication access is huge, and they have to comply with it. Questions to ask about post-secondary goals. Where does the student want to live? Where does the student want to work? And where does the student want to attend school? And these questions have to be asked and addressed at every transition meeting after your student turns 16, or once the transition plan starts. The goals you should set. What does the student need to learn how to be able to live where he wants to live? So if he wants to live on campus, what does the student need to learn now so that when he exits high school, he'll be able to live on campus? What does the student need to learn now to work where he wants to work? We need to work on pre-employment skills, whether it's in a mall, whether it's in a jewelry place, whether it's in a mechanic shop. We need to address those skills so that when he graduates or she graduates, they will have the skills needed to do that job that they want to do. What does the student need to learn now to attend the school that he wants to attend? Again, reading level, math level, earning Carnegie units, passing ACT or SAT, passing end of course testing, being able to get a regular diploma, or being able to get vocational diploma, whatever is needed to put in place so that the student will attend what he wants to attend. We need to work on it, like I said, from the first IEP moving up, but we also need to work on it through the transition plan. Martin Luther King said, if you cannot fly, then run. If you cannot run, then walk. If you cannot walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving. So the option of keeping the kids at home post high school is not an option. We have to always be doing something. We have to always work towards their growth, even it was baby steps. Even if it was baby steps, we have to work on it. We have to do it. Now we're going to discuss a couple of scenarios. And again, I have 3 different scenarios because I know kids with disabilities have different abilities that could range from minor to more severe. So we're going to talk about this. So Fatima is 9th grader interested in working in a daycare center post-graduation. She has specific learning disabilities, and time management issues are a huge challenge. Fatima understands that her difficulties with time management might interfere with her reaching goals after post-graduation. So we know she's in 9th grade. We know she has issues with learning disabilities and time management. So what do we set in her goals? These are her goals. Fatima will create a list of programs she's interested in attending post-graduation. So she wants to work in childcare center. We need to look at which programs offer childcare diplomas. Fatima will fully complete 2 college applications for child services related degree with 100% accuracy by the end of the semester. So she has a deadline, and she has to manage her time to be able to complete 2 forms that are 100% accurate to be able to submit for her college of interest. The second scenario is Omar. Omar is 17 years old, high school student with diagnosed ADHD, high anxiety, and specific learning disability. He's interested in sport-related career and would like to enroll in vocational or college program in that field. He has difficulty focusing, and his high anxiety prevents him from driving. This will limit his job opportunities to jobs within certain geographic area. So what would the plan look like for Omar? let me see. What are post-secondary goals that would help Omar in obtaining a career in his field of choice? For post-secondary education, before graduating from high school, he will identify and apply for vocational or college program in sports medicine or athletic training. He needs to do the work. He needs to go find where is this specific um, program available, and he needs to apply for it. Job wise, he needs to find a potential employment that is related to sports. He needs to be able to work in a sports related industry. How can he achieve independent living? He will practice taking the bus or the subway to allow him to get back and forth to work. So these are the goals. If he cannot drive, then he needs to be able to take public transportation. If he never in his life took the bus, or he never in his life took the subway and figured out where to get off and where to get on, then he will not be able to get to work. So we address three different things: education, what to do for jobs, and what to do for independent living. Layla. Layla is a high school senior with severe disability and will need to work on several functional skills before being able to live independently. She has expressed interest in art and would like to obtain an art craft related career. So we're going to list three things that would help um, Layla transition services. She will identify accommodation for independent living. We need to figure out what is needed for her to be able to live independently. She will create a work plan, which will include available vocational program related to arts and crafts. And she will learn the skills needed to obtain supplies needed for her art craft, including mail order or online ordering skills. So these are the three goals that they need to work on throughout transition years. Water drops, pierce stones, rope saws, cut wood. So never underestimate the abilities of anybody, and always keep the bar high, and always presume competence. So I have some time. We have some time for questions. So let me know if you have any questions. And these are the resources that I used. The Parent Readiness and Empowerment Program. They have a chapter in every state, and they offer a lot of trainings for parents. So check it out. So check Human Service Department for individual states to see if there is option for ABA services. Yes, do that, because if they don't have it, they can guide you to where to go. And again, if it's not available in your state, you can always lead an advocacy effort with other parents to be able to push for legislation change. Any other questions? Our job coaches include, yes, for kids with severe disabilities, they always match a job coach, so that you as a parent would feel more secure that your child is not there alone. We've seen the state, and that happens through rehabilitation services. They would pay a job coach full-time pay to be able to help your child learn the skill, whether it's in an office, whether it's at a grocery store, whether it's at the mall, whatever job that your child have, they can assign a job coach. The job coach can be temporary, just until your child learns the skill, and sometimes it can be just full time. As long as your child is learning, the job coach will be there. Actually, a few years back, I worked at a nonprofit organization, and there was a young lady there. She had Down syndrome, and she did office work. She used to type flyers and stuff, and she had a full-time job coach that would guide her and lead her and help her do her job. And she stayed with her for a long time. I'm hoping that this presentation was useful for you guys. Thank you for joining this presentation. Please feel free to contact Sister Farial or Sister Juhi if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, either through messages or through like email.